Last week, Jewish Voice for Peace, who have been guests on this show, made an announcement clarifying their stance as anti-Zionist. After years of conversation and debate, the human rights organization wrote that Zionism runs counter to their vision of, quote, justice, equality, and freedom for all people. In the statement, JVP recognizes the pain and trauma associated with this question, acknowledging how hard it is to discuss what many Jews still think of as a necessary response to widespread oppression in the 19th century, which culminated in, as we all know, the Holocaust. Yet, it is a conversation worth having, a vital one in fact, and one that JVP notes brought to light the harm that Zionism has caused to not only Palestinians, but to Jews as well, by creating a hierarchy of Judaism where European Jews reign supreme over Jewish people of color, opening ever more fissures in communities that could, and in many cases have, lived peacefully for hundreds of years. JVP also makes the connection between fear-based Zionism and the right-wing extremism that we are battling worldwide by highlighting that both call for more checkpoints, more walls, and more guns. In conclusion, JVP writes, especially as we face the violent anti-Semitism fueled by white nationalism in the United States today, we choose solidarity. We choose collective liberation. We choose a future where everyone, including Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, can live their lives freely in vibrant, safe, equitable communities with basic human needs fulfilled. Join us. This strong statement came on the heels of S1, or the so-called anti-BDS bill, gaining cloture in the Senate, meaning that it can move forward with debate and potential passage. By the time you watch this, in fact, it may already have passed the Senate. Called the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act of 2019, this bill is precisely what you'd expect from that name. And as we covered in the last segment, strengthening the profits of the military-industrial complex while pummeling human rights and, incidentally, our own security. Its other faults aside, this bill raised a lot of ire due to its focus on the BDS movement, or the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement, which has gained considerable and global support as a powerful and nonviolent way of confronting the horrors meted out by the Israeli state on the Palestinian people. Using anti-Semitism as an excuse, lawmakers led by dipshit with small man syndrome Marco Rubio included in S1 that state and local governments will have explicit legal authority to boycott any U.S. companies which themselves are participating in a boycott against Israel. Here to talk more about S1, Israel, and the importance of not confusing anti-Israel with anti-Jewish is Nora Barrows-Friedman, associate editor of the electronic Intifada and author of In Our Power, U.S. Students Organize for Justice in Palestine, a, quote, masterpiece of social movement journalism, which chronicles the work of students for justice in Palestine, highlighting their voices in the fight for human and political rights. Take a look. This isn't really the first time that we've seen this bill. What's different this time around, if anything?
That's a really good question. There is not much difference between the bills that have passed in state legislatures. You mentioned 26 states in the past few years that have passed these kinds of bills, which are essentially like the boycotter bills, which are inherently unconstitutional. They exist to punish and sometimes criminalize people who have, business contracts with the state. If those people who have contracts with the state that pass these laws believe that Israel is, doing human rights violations, and therefore they don't want to purchase Israeli products, the state then can cancel their contracts or not renew their contracts, essentially punishing people for thought crimes and political affiliations with human rights movements.
And another thing is it's not just about companies that have contracts. I mean, individual contractors who work for local and state governments can be directly targeted by this. So it's like it's not just, oh, we're not going to do business with this, company. It's really about an individual right to say that I don't actually want to have anything to do with Israel in this way.
Right.
The interesting thing is, how do you really enforce something like this? It seems kind of vague, because somebody might not be doing business with an Israeli company, but they might not be a part of the BDS movement. So how do you basically have to sit them down and say, hey, why are you not doing business with Israeli government or Israeli entities? Like, how do you even enforce something like this?
No, it's completely insane when you try to parse it out in how it will be, instituted. And which, also just speaks to the level of absurdity that these kinds of bills are at. I mean, there's a case, The Intercept reported on it a couple months ago, of a speech pathologist in the Austin, I believe, public school system in Texas, who, when she went to renew her contract as a state employee, because she works for the school system, somewhere down the line in the contract was, I do not plan to boycott the state of Israel while I'm under contract. So essentially a loyalty oath to the state of Israel in this contract so that she could teach kids. There's not even, the Intercept pointed out, there's not even loyalty oaths to the United States or the state of Texas in those contracts. There's not even loyalty oaths to the children that she would be teaching. But Israel is held to the special exception, and she was not going to sign a loyalty oath to a foreign country when she's of Palestinian descent, and she supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is a nonviolent movement organized by Palestinian civil society to say that we reject Israel's apartheid and violations of international law and human rights. And we're going to bring economic pressure on Israel to stop its human rights violations, just as the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa used boycott, divestment, and sanctions in their struggle for liberation. So, she didn't sign the loyalty oath, and now she lost her contract. And so, but if she, so the thought process here, under this contract is that if she went to a Walmart, for example, and was looking at she really likes carbonated drinks. And she was looking at all the carbonated drink makers, and there's SodaStream, and there's other ones. And she was looking at SodaStream, and she saw that it was, made by an Israeli company, and she supports the BDS movement. So she wouldn't buy that SodaStream. She'd buy something else. She is in violation of the loyalty oath, right? But if she was looking at all the fizzy drink makers and she just didn't like the look of the SodaStream one, didn't like how fizzy, or not fizzy their drinks were made, that would be okay.
And it's also a curious question because there are boycotts against a lot of other things. For instance, like boycott Amazon, boycott Walmart, boycott things, made or produced in Turkey or Saudi Arabia or things like that. So I know you said that it seems unlikely that this specific thing will pass, but there are other ones in the works. What kind of precedent would this set to, for example, say that, oh, you can't boycott anything associated with Saudi Arabia or Turkey or with these, this list of corporations?
Right. Or like when North Carolina, there was a boycott against North Carolina by, politicians in this country when they were trying to pass their anti-transgender bathroom bills. So the precedent is really significant. If it's okay for states and the U.S. government to boycott people who boycott Israel, then where does that end? And again, the Supreme Court in the early 1970s upheld the right of people to voice their opinions through political boycotts. And it absolutely falls under the First Amendment. And it's, again, we see Israel being held to this special exception. We see the Israel lobby pouring, just unbelievable amounts of funds and political pressure on politicians to try and do Israel's bidding on Capitol Hill.
I kind of wanted to veer into the unpopular topic of Israel, of the the difference between Israel and Jews. And the interesting thing is that bills like S1 actually work against the concept of anti-Jewish behavior, because it proves that our government is really in service of Israel. And so the people that are like, oh yeah, Jews eat babies and also own the government, like, it doesn't really do much to dissuade these people from these wackadoo perceptions. So I wanted to get your take on, first of all, that kind of irony right there. And then, of course, the problem with folks conflating Israel and a global culture of Judaism.
Right. Ooh, oh my God. If we had a couple hours, we could start like just get the tip of the iceberg there. Yeah, I mean, there has been a concerted effort by Zionists, and I mean that people who believe in Israel's state ideology, that Israel is a place only for Jews, to really conflate Judaism and the Jewish people with Zionism and Israel. Myself as a Jewish person, I have nothing to do with Israel. I don't have any I don't have, based on my politics, obviously. But also I just, my ancestors didn't come from there. They came from Eastern Europe. Zionism is an ideology that says that Jews are inherently belong to that land more than anyone else belongs to it. And that therefore there's an entitlement of Jews wherever they are in the world to that property and that land that is held and owned by Palestinians. That is a fascist ideology. It's a settler colonial ideology, obviously. And it's not the ideology that many Jews share. It's a disaster, and it is actually ironically anti-Semitic to conflate all Jews with the state of Israel, to conflate all Jews and Judaism with Israel's state practices and policies, and including the policy of settler colonialism. That's not who Jewish people want to align with or affiliate with. Yet it is, Israel's state leadership, including Netanyahu, who declared himself the leader of the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. I didn't get a ballot to vote on that one. And politicians in the U.S. who say that, for example, who exploited the murder of 11 Jewish worshipers at a synagogue in Pittsburgh last October, who exploited those murders to say that we need to better support Israel and we need to give Israel, exactly what they want. And we need to crack down on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is supported by many Jewish organizations in this country, because it is inherently, what they call anti-Semitic. Has nothing to do, and BDS and the movement for Palestinian rights has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish bigotry. It is a movement, a global anti-racist, anti-fascist, anti-colonialist movement rooted in human rights and international law that says that Palestinians deserve to be treated equally, and Palestinians should be able to return to their lands and homes that they were expelled from 70 years ago.
So what do you feel is the right thing, not just for us to do in the United States with regards to Israel, but in terms of giving Palestinians their basic human rights?
I think the first thing that needs to happen is we need to cut all aid to Israel. I mentioned the $38 billion. That was something that Obama signed over is a 10-year deal. And Marco Rubio's bill just kind of reimagines it or reiterates it. We have no business supporting an apartheid fascist settler colonial state. Especially when we don't have healthcare, when we're not paying our federal workers, when we're, when our schools are under, I could go on the list and, of things we could be using that money for is endless. But also we need to condemn Israel in international courts because of its 70 years of violence and violations of human rights and of basic decency. we need to uphold popular movements like the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which again is a nonviolent global grassroots movement led by Palestinian civil society to demand their rights and not criminalize the people who are trying to support that movement.
And finally, I guess like sort of the playing devil's advocate here, I guess like a counter argument is, with regards to Jews wanting to move to that area, so-called Israel, that if you go back, far enough, then the Jewish faith and the Jewish people stem from that area.
Right. I mean, the thing is, yes, there have always been Jews in that land. There have always been ties to that land, but that doesn't mean that one community or population has the right to expel everyone else. 2,000 years later, or whatever their claim is, and not just expel people, but make it impossible for the refugees. There's now over 7 million Palestinian refugees to go back, and when scholars, activists, and Palestinians themselves talk about how they envision the end of Israeli apartheid and the end of the occupation, people want to live in a single secular democratic state that represents the entirety of its population. It's not about kicking another population out. It's about learning how to live in that region, in that area together, but with the same equality, like under the same laws. There are separate laws for settlers in the West Bank, and right next door in a Palestinian village, they're subjected to different laws. That's because of apartheid. That's because of white supremacy. That's because of Zionism. And when you get rid of those ideologies, when everyone is then made to live in a society that treats everybody equally, that's a great starting point.
Yeah.
That's basically where we should be focusing our attention.
To read more of Nora's work, visit electronicintifada.net.